good, man?
Alright everybody, Resident Evil 3 just came out this weekend. What? 2 months? Are you telling me that I'm late to the party? That never happens. Okay, so I bought Resident Evil 3 Remake near launch, and I played the absolute shit out of it. For an entire week I lived, breathed, and shat Raccoon City, all until I got the Platinum Trophy. And after that, I was gonna make a video about it. I even wrote an entire script. But after all these great reviewers gave their thoughts and the general consensus was pretty much established, I felt like a madman. Because despite never playing the original, I paid the full $60 for Resident Evil 3 Remake, and I felt like every penny was well worth it. Is it a perfect game? No, but nothing really is. Essentially, in the end, I felt like my opinion just wasn't needed, so I scrapped my finished script and walked away. However, I always felt empty for not making a video about a game that I played so damn much. So now, here we are, in June, talking about the Resident Evil 3 Remake. And if you saw the title, then you can piece together that I'm going to be conveying why I enjoy this game and talk about the criticism surrounding it. Anyways, strap in fuckos, it's gonna be a bumpy ride. And let's jump in to the Resident Evil 3 Remake.
Resident Evil 3.
For gameplay, this installment essentially plays the same as Resident Evil 2 Remake, and I like that. There were some things that were excluded from this game, such as the adaptive difficulty, certain death animations, and even extra content like a traditional Mercenaries mode. Get that shit out of my face! All of which are ridiculous exclusions. It's probably the result of parts of this game being outsourced to companies like M2 or Redworks. It's a damn shame that these enjoyable and immersive aspects have just been yanked from 3. In the end, however, at its core, it still plays like a newer Resi title. And as long as there's some sort of evolution or innovation, I'm completely okay with having the same core gameplay from title to title, which is where the Bayonetta-esque dodge mechanic, or Valentine as coined by the Sphere Hunter, and the shop for in-game rewards comes into play. The perfect dodge mechanic is great when used. If you can master the timing, then the later difficulties, especially the final boss, will be a cakewalk for you. For me, sometimes it worked, and sometimes it didn't. It's very much a risk-reward kind of mechanic. Get close to the zombie and press the button at the right time, bam! You sucker punch the bitch. But if you fuck up, shit, that's fucking gruesome. The shop for the in-game reward system is perfect, and it should be in more games. It entices the player to get better at the game in order to earn more coins, whether that be through completing achievements, or even earning S ranks on your playthroughs. And once you finally get a hefty amount of coins, you get the fucking good shit. The infinite weapons as well as the medallions makes you an unstoppable bastard. To some, this makes later difficulties far too easy, but it's not required to buy the stuff, it's completely up to the player's choice. Which brings me to my final gameplay point, difficulty. Now, this isn't going to be a surprise to anybody, but I suck at video games. I'm not on DSP's level, I'm more of a Matt Watson from Super Mega. I try and I try and I try to get good at games, but to no avail. However, occasionally there's that one game where I'm like a fucking ninja, and that also hard difficulty, whack-ass baby shit to me. Infamous Second Son, Spider-Man, and now, the Resident Evil 3 Remake. The only issue I can see people having are the bosses, which are enjoyable to both look at and to play, but they require very little precision and thought. Except for the motherfucking final boss! No, spoilers, I guess. Nemesis turns into this impure demonic sludge thing.
God, I'm already a demon.
I can't say that. Justice from 2 months ago, what the fuck are you thinking? This shit swallower destroyed my soul on Inferno, but eventually defeating him was the most satisfying feeling in my entire life. But enough positives, we're supposed to be making a case for the game against all the bad press. So let's move on to the big bad himself. I feel like the biggest argument against Resi 3, not only as a remake but just as a standalone game, is the story's lack of focus on Nemesis. The Nemesis subtitle from the original was just hacked off, however, the villain was still a prevalent part of all the marketing. So when the game finally released, there was a lot of people claiming that Nemesis just isn't in enough of the game. And I completely disagree, and to make my point, I'm going to compare him to his predecessor, Mr. X. Let's start with Mr. X's introduction. In Resident Evil 2 Remake's A scenarios, X is introduced by the player's choice. It is a gameplay mechanic that you can introduce yourself, either ASAP by turning off the fire and walking towards the helicopter crash, or you can hold off on doing this until the very last second. The length of his initial introduction is up to you. After Mr. X is introduced, however, he'll constantly be stalking you throughout the police department. So during the rest of your time in the station, the actual number of times you interact with Mr. X and the frequency of said interactions are entirely up to chance. Now personally, I didn't see him that much my first time around, but for all of my subsequent playthroughs, he was on my ass like a predator. After you leave said police department, he shows up a couple more times during scripted sections to fuck with you. Then, depending on which character you're playing as, he's either your final boss, or he gets murdered halfway through the story. So while X is a mix of both scripted and mechanic, he's more of the latter. Now, onto the introduction of Nemesis. He bursts right through your fucking door at the beginning of the game, which does remove the sense of dread from the Resi 2 remake, where you're just waiting for him to be introduced. But it replaces it with just frantic terror. His moments, while scripted, still have that tendency to freak you out during your first playthrough. That feeling that he can be anywhere and he'll pop out at any second. This all actually lines up with my relation between Mr. X and the original Terminator movie. Now, not just Nemesis, but the Resident Evil 3 remake as a whole is now indicative of its sequel, in more ways than one, but hey, we'll get there soon enough. The real issue people have between the two characters is scripted story moments versus embedded gameplay mechanics. We already know that Mr. X is a mashup of both of them, showing up randomly only in the police station or during scripted moments the developers put in just to freak you out, while Nemesis is completely scripted except for the Raccoon City aspect. And honestly, I kinda like it. I brushed over it in my Resi 2 video, but I completely stopped playing my first time around right after the introduction of Mr. X. I always felt like I was seconds away from shitting myself. Yes, the first playthrough, it was terrifying when he was introduced. It's a feeling that I want everybody to experience. It practically makes the police station the terrifying place that it is. But the second, third, and even fourth playthroughs, you pretty much know how to either avoid him or completely knock him down. So encountering him constantly became annoying as fuck. Mr. X eventually became a nuisance, one that can be easily dodged or avoided by people who know the game well as long as you have ammo and patience. He's the nuisance that Nemesis isn't. When Nemesis does follow you in Raccoon City, it's not for very long, but it still manages to send a rush of anxiety that Mr. X wishes he can conjure. Look, at the end of the day, they both have their purpose. I just happen to like Nemesis more. He gets the point across of being an unstoppable monster without bothering my playthrough. Mr. X is still an amazing gameplay achievement that should be revered, and he makes the first half of Resident Evil 2 extremely interesting. But like a blowjob from a corpse, it gets really dry really fast. The next thing I have to touch on is Jill. When it comes to Resident Evil protagonists, Jill Valentine has earned her spot right next to Leon. I was really nervous that she would just kind of be one note like Claire or even Chris from Revelations, especially since in Revelations, Jill also had little to no character. But luckily, she leans more into the action horror movie protagonist vibe, standing her ground, wielding badass weapons, looking cool as fuck, and saying great one-liners.
Bitch can't even swim.
She's just really enjoyable to play as and to watch, which is what makes the lack of focus on her PTSD from the events of Resident Evil 1 so disappointing. I feel like that plot point was put in specifically for hardcore RE fans, and it makes sense. But the fact that there's only 2 quick scenes of her nightmares involving either her or Carlos turning into zombies, and it's just never brought up in a conversation or gets implemented into a gameplay section, is just depressingly lackluster. You could have had a trippy psychological horror section in this game which would have progressed this as an arc for Jill. However, that would have ended up clashing with the more fast pace this game is going for, so they just threw it in the garbage halfway through the story. Jill is still a way more enjoyable protagonist than Claire and is just as good as Leon, but I felt like there still could have been more. Now, Carlos is an odd, shaggy-haired man who's always hitting on Jill. I'm sure that's just to make stan accounts feel justified, but regardless, he too is an enjoyable character. But more importantly, he has an actual arc about learning what his employer, Umbrella, is really doing behind the scenes. Initially, he has absolutely no clue about the company's wrongdoings, which just reminds me that these first 3 games all happened within a span of only 2 months or so. About halfway through the story, Carlos learns a little too late that he's working for the bad guys. And I really like it. I mean, it wasn't exactly subtle, but I was satisfied with his character. The chemistry between him and Jill works really well, so much that when the game ended, I was sad that my favorite Resident Evil duo were leaving as well. I guess that just leaves Nikolai. Fucking hell. He's boring, he's stale, and he has absolutely no stakes in the story besides serving the same purpose as Ada Wong in Resident Evil 2, which is to destroy the sample that our main characters are after. Whether it be the antidote or virus itself, their purpose in the story is to destroy it. We all know that it has to be done by the end of the game for the series to keep going, but I just wish there was a more well-written way than just shooting it for no reason seconds right before the end credits. Nikolai's accent and his hammy behavior redeem him to the point of where he's ironically enjoyable. He's a shit character, and I wish he had more of a hand in the conflict of this game than just occasionally showing up and shit-talking Jill. Apparently in the original game, Nikolai was a part of Umbrella, he was just in Raccoon City on his own separate mission. But in the remake, it was implied that he was going to sell the antidote to a buyer, and it's never explained who it is, which kinda makes the entire last 5 minutes feel like a setup to a new sequel. There's even a damn after credits scene. Now, to be honest, I'd be all over an original spin-off to Resident Evil 3. Who was Nikolai working for? Who was Jill going after? It all sounds like fun shit. But unfortunately, there's some issues with Resident Evil 3 Remake that I do have to mention, seeing as the title is making a case for Resident Evil 3, and I think we all know what I'm going to be talking about. Girth. I mean length. Fuck! Now, to be completely fair, this game is pretty damn short. If you've played Resident Evil 2 Remake or just any action game, you can finish your first playthrough in 3 to 4 hours, but to me, that's alright. With inclusions such as the aforementioned shop and 5 separate difficulties, the latter 2 of which having changes to item placements, enemies, and typewriters, Resident Evil 3 Remake has no problem with length, at least due to the way I played it. The additional difficulties and the trophies offer a new enjoyable challenge for players, something to test your skills under pressure while still being fun. Yeah, you remember fun? Not tedious fucking BS all for the stake for a digital piece of glass? I feel like I need to reiterate, I have not played the original Resident Evil 3, but arguing that this isn't a complete game due to set pieces from the original being omitted just baffles me. While I think everybody would have loved that stuff to be in there, there's nothing in this game's story that screams incomplete. Sure, we can all complain about the lack of a mercenaries mode as well as lots of additional costumes, and the sad inclusion of a game that I will never touch, but when it comes down to the story, a remake is completely free to omit and change whatever it wants. So to kind of tether it to the idea that it has to do X, Y, and Z is a bit ridiculous. I believe that the problem that people have with this game is that it's linear, instead of the mostly open nature of the police station in Resi 2. In my opinion, the linearity feeds back into the story and its tone. It ends up actually feeling like this game takes place during one night, like it should. There's so many fucking games that claim that they take over the course of 10 or so hours, but never actually feel like it. The fast pace is one that is intended and just fits with the overall writing for this game. It's okay if you don't like the way that this game progresses. Everyone is entitled to their opinion, but I just don't agree that the argument is that the game is incomplete. Rushed? Possibly, but we don't know the facts. Incomplete? Negative. I'm just kind of surprised that it took me 5 installments of this damn franchise to finally learn what kind of Resident Evil game I enjoy, and the Resi 3 Remake showed it to me. I like my Resident Evil games really short and sweet, something that I can complete in an afternoon on my day off, something that I can easily learn, and one that's definitely replayable. 6 doesn't allow you to really learn anything or use your brain whatsoever, it just throws enemies and lackluster cutscenes your way. Revelations, despite being a functional game on paper, is the video game equivalent of a wet sock. Operation Raccoon City is too fucking broken and bare bones for people to enjoy its underlying creativity, and 2 actually hit the nail on the head. But if that's the case, then what's so special about Resident Evil 3? What makes it so great? The Resident Evil 3 Remake, like Terminator 2, is one giant chase. It is a non-stop action race against the clock for our main characters, and I fucking love that. 2 was the closest thing I'd ever had to my ideal Resi game before 3, and it did a damn fine job. It too sometimes felt like an action movie, but it also knew when to slow down and focus on the horror. There was a pressing situation at hand, but there wasn't a literal ticking clock. I love Resident Evil 2 Remake, and both of these hold their ground as my favorite Resi games as of the recording of this video. But I don't know, man. There's just this captivating rush when just thinking about Resi 3, even after 7 playthroughs in 2 months. Sure, it was incredibly satisfying to finish 2's multiple campaigns, but maybe it's due to its short runtime, easily replayable story, and mostly scripted encounters with the Trash Man. Resident Evil 3 is just a more streamlined experience that I can easily enjoy. I feel like some people are gonna hate me for this. I still love Resident Evil 2 a lot. It's my baby, but now I just have 2, and like any honest parent, I secretly have a favorite child. I get that Resident Evil fans and even just casual players may feel like there's just not enough of the serious staples. That there's too much action, the pacing is too quick, it's just not their cup of tea. And that's fine. I feel like aspects like Nemesis and areas like the hospital keep a good amount of that horror intact, but to each their own. The more I think about it, the more this game feels like what Resident Evil 6 tried to be, minus the shitty story. It's a fast-paced game where our protagonists are racing against the clock to save the world. I just love that shit, especially when it's done really well. If I was asked to describe Resident Evil 3 Remake in a shitty analogy, it would be this. This game is like a piece of avocado toast. To some, it represents the worst parts of the franchise or even the industry. It's selling something at a high price for no reason, even though that it's garbage that can't even live up to the other toasts. But to others, it's the thing that they've been waiting for. It's the toast to end all toast. It's the only thing they'll eat for a week. Then they'll buy a poster of it for their office to show off this work of art to all those who walk past it. And the rest of the people just don't have YouTube channels. In all seriousness, I know that it's not a perfect game, maybe not even a great game to some, but Resident Evil 3 Remake is so much fun. When I earned that platinum trophy at 1 AM, I played Heaven's Divide so loud that the closest Blockbuster could hear it. It's a gamer moment that I'll cherish for a long time. When it comes to fun action games, I'm putting Resident Evil 3 next to Metal Gear Solid 5 and Uncharted 2 as some of my favorites. Despite 100%ing it, this will be a game that I will always come back to periodically over the years and be grateful for all the fun times it's given me. Now, I know that the perception of this game is mixed, but I truly do believe that now that it's on sale everywhere for only $40, that everybody and their mother should give this a chance. Just do your best to turn off your preconceived notions and enjoy the Resident Evil 3 Remake at a lower price. Anyways, I've said my piece, it's time to crawl back into my fucking hole and then think up some more bad opinions to spew onto the internet. Later kids, have a good night. They call me the gunslinger. What the fuck am I doing?